Hello and welcome to this little video for mass movement winds and glaciers. Okay, so now we're going to go on to wind. So what are the things that we want to talk about here is that what are the conditions that contribute to the likelihood that an area will experience wind erosion, and what features are characteristics of wind erosion and deposition, and finally how do dunes form and migrate. Okay, so wind erosion, it's really common in areas like deserts and sand dunes, coastal dune areas, beaches, but there are certain conditions that will cause some wind erosion in agricultural areas. So you can see here that here's this corn rows here, and we have all of this dust down in here. So there are some things that can cause wind erosion in agricultural areas, but it's mainly the landscape and condition of the land which leads to the most damaging wind erosion. So I have these pictures up here. Here's some picture of some wind erosion that has happened here, causing these funky rock formations. That's just wind that has done that. And then this is a map of the United States showing the most common areas for wind erosion. And you can see that wind erosion is very, very common along the coastal regions here. We don't see a lot over here, but there's a little bit there. You can see in Nevada, there are areas in Nevada. And of course you know that in our area here that we do have lots of wind. These are just windy areas through here. This is right up through here through Idaho. This is the Snake River Valley, and a lot of wind in that area. And then, man, this huge area all the way through the Midwest and the Great Plain area. So all of this area is caused, the wind erosion is usually caused through agricultural practices. Back in the mid-1900s, mid to early 1900s, because of agricultural practices where they would go into an area and till it under, and they would get rid of all the vegetation to prepare it for planting the next year. Well, there was a drought, and there was no wind, no water that to moisten the soil, no roots to hold the soil in there, and then these big windstorms came through, and it loose, dry dirt. And you've seen this happen on our fields where somebody's just plowed a field and the wind picks up and you get these big dust storms coming off of the fields. Well, this happened in the big plains, the Great Plains area, where it was huge tracts of land that were plowed and dry, just bone dry, and this area was called the Dust Bowl during that time. And so since then, we've come up with some agricultural practices to help keep our soil in place, like no-till planting and doing strip planting, where we plant in one area, and then an adjacent area to it there's windbreaks, or there native grasses that will hold on to the soil. So there's lots of things that they do to mitigate that problem. Okay, some features of these wind erosion areas is deflation. Okay, so deflation, what that is, it's like the lowering of the land surface that results from wind removing surface particles. So I have this picture up here. This is where the soil originally was, and you can see that it has some of these bigger particles here, with some finer particles in between. Well, the wind comes along and picks up all those finer particles, and it lowers the level of the soil. And now we've got more of these big particles that the wind can't pick up above it. It still has some area where the dust is going to get pulled out of there. It gets pulled out, further deflating that soil. And so you can see here's where the soil originally was, here's where it is now. All of this in between, this bigger stuff now, is right at the top layer. And here's a picture of what that looks like. They call this desert pavement. And it just happens from deflation, from removing all of the fine particles from the soil and leaving the big heavy stuff behind. They call that deflation. Another feature here is dunes. So these are sand dunes here, and they're just piles of wind-blown sand. Wind is strong enough to be able to move these along, pick them up just a little bit. They can do a process called saltation where they pick up the sand just a little bit, and then it bounces like kind of like a bouncy ball along the surface. Call that saltation. Or it can roll along the surface. But you know, as the wind is blowing, it's picking up these sand piles, it's blowing off all the rest of the fine particles, just leaving the sand behind, and you get this big pile of sand left there. And then loess is wind-blown silt deposits. Now in Ohio and Iowa areas, they have these big, huge piles of loess, and it's really fertile soil. But they think that what has happened with that is that from the last glaciation, after the glaciers retreated and that fine particles that the glaciers were grinding up, as it was blown away, it was blown into these big piles and created these loess deposits. So we think that it's from glaciers from the last glaciation, but it's just like silt and clay, big piles of it. Okay, dune formation. How did dunes form? So dunes, number one, you have to have wind, and number two, you have to have a sand source. Sand then gets blown along by the wind here. As it blows along, it's going to get, it starts to pile up on something. It could be like a bush or a tree or picnic bench or a hill or whatever it is. They pile up. The sand starts to pile up over top of that, fence or whatever right here. And then as it gets as it gets picked up and moved on, like I said, by saltation or rolling, all these little pieces are going to get pushed up along the top here, and then it reaches the top, and they kind of slide down this slip face. This is the windward side, and this is the leeward side of the sand dune, and this is a very gentle slope, and then we have a 34-degree slope over here on this other side. So this area right here, the sand is going to be eroded from here, and it's going to be deposited down here, and you can see how this works. So sand's eroded here, and it's deposited down this slip face. So over time, these sand dunes are going to migrate. They're going to go in different directions. And as long as the wind continues to blow and as long as there's sand there, the dunes will migrate. Conditions that contribute to the likelihood that an area will experience wind. So we're talking about drought and agricultural practices. Are you in a desert or along the coast? Any of those kinds of things, they will contribute to the likelihood of an area experiencing wind erosion. The features that we have there, we're talking about deflation, dunes, and loess. And then how do dunes form and migrate? Well, they erode on the windward side and they deposit on the leeward, so they'll erode and deposit and they just move along. And as long as the wind continues to blow, we're going to have that dune migration. Okay, I hope that this was helpful to you, and I'll see you later.